the Village Hall in the sitting in here so you can see us all, hopefully, if everything works right, and it has. Again, if you want to join the Zoom, the link is at the top of the agenda. There is also an audio dial-in with the meeting ID if you choose to use that, or you can show up in person here at the Village Hall in Cottage Grove. Let's confirm that we have a quorum. Lisa, please.
Allen.
Present.
Murphy. Present. Peterson.
Here.
Radcliffe.
Here.
Valencia. Present. Vandervelde.
Present.
And Williams.
Present. We'll start with we have a quorum and the agenda was properly posted. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 5 is discuss and consider our meeting minutes from our regular board meeting held on August 2nd. Any comments, edits, or a motion?
Move to approve.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Paul. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Next, we have a presentation to the board regard from our 2020 audit from Baker Tilley. Amanda?
Hello, I'm on.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. All right. I think I'm going to share my screen here. So let me. So could you see what says Appendix E audit results?
Yes, we do.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, just to get started, thanks for having me tonight. I'm going to talk about the 2020 financial audit and results. As part of the audit process, we issue an opinion on a set of financial statements, and I think you should have received copies of those. It's a larger document with lots of information in it. We issue a related document, which is a document that I have pulled up here. This used to be called our communication to those charged with governance and management. We kind of made this a new look in recent years here, and we call it our reporting and insights or audit results letter. So if you have that with you, you can follow along, otherwise I'll have this up. We've included some of the financial highlight graphs that we typically present on in the back of this. A little bit different look to them than maybe you've seen in the past, but a lot of the information is pretty similar. To start out with, we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, which is the highest assurance that we can give. What that means is that the financial statements we believe to be free of material misstatement. So what you're looking at there should be accurate, in our opinion. I'm going to jump into this document here. The first couple of pages deal with the general fund. And so there's a lot of focus on the general fund because that's the main operating fund of the village. A majority of the tax levy goes there, much of the administration and major operating costs are charged there. It's often looked at as a measure of the financial health of a municipality. And so some of the key indicators that we've included here talk about fund balance. And so fund balance is essentially the equity of the general fund. So it's assets minus your liabilities in that fund. And then that equity is further broken down into various categories, which we'll talk about here. First of all, if we look at the summarized income statement, you'll see that revenues exceeded expenditures in 2020 by about $335,000. So that $335,000 is added to this green bar of your total fund balance for the general fund. And you'll see that the green bar is actually larger than the black bar in every category, which indicates that every category of fund balance also increased. These can sometimes go back and forth depending on the specifics of the year, but I'll go into detail on each of these. Excuse me. The first, I'm going to start at the bottom here. The first category of fund balance is your non-spendable, which means that it's the part of your equity that isn't available to be spent at the current time or as of the end of 2020. That balance was about $319,000 compared to $222,000 last year, so that went up. We like to see this, a good explanation what happened. Why is our equity going up that we can't spend? And in this case, it does relate to advances that the general fund has made to the TIF districts, specifically TIF 6 and TIF 10. Each of those are getting interim financing from the general fund versus going out in the marketplace and financing some of those costs. TIF 10 is a new TIF, and so some of those startup costs are just, again, temporarily financed by the general fund. That's about $37,000. And then TIF 6, you're probably aware of the challenges that has had getting an increment generated through this point. That balance, TIF 6 owes $255,000 to the general fund. So the hope is that that can be repaid at a future time, and if those repayments come in, then that non-spendable fund balance will decrease. There's about $27,000 or so that is also included in non-spendable fund balance, and that's a combination of prepaid items, which we've already spent the money for in 2020, that will then benefit us in 21. And then there's about $18,000 in delinquent receivables. Those are delinquent personal property taxes, as well as special assessments that are still owed to the village. And again, those are not liquid receivables at this point, so they are included in that non-spendable fund balance as well. The assigned fund balance, if we go up a couple of lines, you'll see that there's zeros in these other middle categories. The assigned fund balance is really equity that's been earmarked for a specific purpose. And in this case, this has been assigned or earmarked for the 2021 budget year. So there's two items making up this $365,000 balance. Most of that, or $320,000 of that, is related to the payment in lieu of tax that the water utility pays to the general fund on an annual basis. The reason that's sitting in assigned is because it's really related to next year's budget. It's meant to fund next year's expenditures. The rest of that amount, about $45,000, is related to fund balance that was applied during the 2021 budget process. So there, about $45,000 of reserves was used to balance the budget for 21. The rest of the fund balance lands in this unassigned category, which means that this money is free to be used for any purpose. And I should back up that assigned fund balance can be managed by the board to some extent as to how that gets used in the future. But again, that unassigned is really a key indicator, and we see that increase almost $200,000 this year, which is a great thing, for that general fund to have additional funds on hand. So in summary, this $335,000 net income was broken up into these various categories as we just discussed. Does anyone have any questions on that so far? All right, I'll move on. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. This is another way to look at fund balance on this next chart here. We look at your fund balance and compare it to the annual expenditures. And so what we're doing here is this green line indicates referred to as unrestricted. It's available for our use to some extent. And so we take those and add them together and compare them to your annual general fund budget. And so the village has a goal of landing somewhere between 20 and 30%, which are these red and black lines on this chart. And you'll see that this green line has consistently been over that amount. So you're exceeding your goal. As of the end of 20, about 40% of your annual general fund budget is reflected in your fund balance. So essentially that means you can make it through 40% of your year if you had no other revenue source. Now, a good benchmark to compare that to is the Government Finance Officers Association recommends having a minimum of a minimum of 2 months on hand, which equates to about 17%. So the goal is to be above that, and the actual has been even above that. Any questions?
Amanda, does that help when we go to borrow or whatever? I mean, there's a lot of factors in that, but for our rating?
Yeah, it certainly feeds into it. I'm not sure all of the factors that they look at when they're rating for bond issuance, but this definitely is one of them. You know, the financial health, how much do you have in reserves, you know, if something were to go wrong. You know, and that includes, you know, some kind of emergency situation. Do we have, you know, can we deal with things? Are we liquid? You know, would it put us in a bad position if we had an emergency pop up? Anything else?
Yeah, second question is, are we restricted? So obviously this is trending up. Is there a statute or something like that that says you shouldn't be above X percent?
There is not a statute
Okay.
To that effect.
John, I can speak to, so part of our 5-year financial management plan factors in these reserves and how to strategically use them for one-time purchases. So there are, while it's trending high for a purpose because there's some spend down of that in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So for instance, this year and next year, there'll be some pressures on our budget. We'll likely have to utilize some of these funds for one-time expenditures.
Yeah. I just want to make it clear for everyone, you know,
Sure.
where we're at.
Yep.
And that's a good footnote to that it's probably going to do this.
Yeah, and I would say smaller municipalities tend to be in those higher percentages where you might see someone, you know, another organization that's larger can manage at a lower percentage, but we tend to see our smaller clients at a little bit higher percentage. Okay. Anything else on fund balance for the general fund? All right, we'll move on to debt. General obligation debt is another factor that we spent some time taking a look at. I'm going to start at the bottom of the page where it lists out the general obligation debt and the revenue debt, and it's broken out by the village or the taxing funds versus the utility or the user charge funds. And you'll see that village and utility both have some general obligation debt outstanding. And the utilities also have revenue debt of about 3.5 million to come up with about 23 million in total of long-term debt outstanding for the village. One thing that I wanted to point out of this almost 16 million of GO debt or general obligation debt, about 9.6 million of that is TIF related. So what that means is that the TIF is responsible for paying those back, depending on, you know, the debt that's been issued for each of those. So when you take that out of this total, you have a well under $10 million in GO debt outstanding for the village that the tax levy is supporting. And then utility actually, you know, pays back their own GO debt via user charges and revenues generated there. GO debt, you might know, there is a statutory limit as to how much can be outstanding for a single municipality, and that equals 5% of your equalized value for the year. So that number changes over time, typically increases as your equalized value also goes up. So what this is doing is comparing that debt capacity or that debt limit on this darker line to what has actually been outstanding. And this includes only GO debt because revenue bond is secured by the revenues generated while the GO debt is secured by the tax levy. So you'll see this big gap here is essentially how much room you have for issuing more debt. Now we don't, want to issue debt up to that maximum because that leaves you very little flexibility to, potentially deal with something that, comes up out of the blue in the future. But the actual debt percentage of debt outstanding compared to the limit at the end of 2020 was 46%. So anywhere around 50 is great. We sometimes see some higher depending on the economic development of the municipality. Active TIFs often have higher debt totals because of all of the borrowing that's happening to get those developed. What's interesting is that, the village of Cottage Grove has some pretty active TIF districts already that make up a good share of this total debt outstanding, and you're still below that 50% mark. So that gives you a lot of room and flexibility as you move forward to future development or capital projects. Another way to look at debt service is how much are you paying in principal and interest per year compared to what your annual expenditures are for the year. So this really, this deals only with governmental funds. It excludes the utilities. But here is where we see, anywhere from 22 up to 27% in the last 5 years. It's kind of bounced around here as the repayment schedules change. But this is taking your total principal and interest and comparing to your non-capital expenditures for the year. So for 2020, we ended up at 25.7%. The benchmark here that we've seen recommended is this 20%. So we're actually a little bit above that. But remember that there's quite a bit of TIF debt outstanding, and the TIFs are actually contributing to that principal and interest total. So again, when you look at what part is tax levy generated, it's actually quite a bit lower. The TIFs actually have paid about $1.6 million of this $2 million in 2020. So again, the amount obligated by the general tax levy is fairly low and would bring that percentage quite a bit lower. So nothing of concern here. Again, this is pretty typical with active TIF districts that have debt that are debt outstanding that's being repaid by those increments generated. Any questions on that? All right. We're going to jump into the water and sewer utilities here. Just provide some overall information. As you probably know, the water utility is regulated by the Public Service Commission. And so you have an authorized rate of return of 5.5%. What that does is it's a calculation of your revenues compared to your assets, essentially, or your planned assets for the utility. And so I often see these quite a bit lower than the actual the authorized rate. So 2.37 this year and 2.11% last year. Not terrible. There's a little bit of room there. What you see here in this graph is you see your revenues in green and your expenses in this blue or black color. And so you'll see in between 16 and 17 a little bit of a jump there. That's usually indicative of a rate increase. So I think there was a pretty significant, even maybe two-step rate increase that happened back then. And since then, it's been, fairly On the flip side, we also have some restricted cash balances that are not included in here because those are set aside for specific purposes. But this unrestricted amount is available to be used, whether it be for operations or to help fund projects or anything else. Let's pay down debt. This investment in capital bar down here just shows how much of our capital assets that we have. So you're talking your utility plant items like the water plant, your wells, your mains that go through the village. This tells us that 29% of them are funded by debt that we have outstanding currently, and 71% are funded by, we've paid for. We owe them free and clear. Generally, we shoot for about a 50-50 split or, minimum of 50-50 equity. So if we're over 50% equity, that is absolutely fine. Sewer utility looks a little bit different most of the time. Here we're trying to cash flow. It's not regulated. There's no rate of return to keep track of. You'll see that we were having some troubles generating and operating income back in 16 and 17. We get a rate increase. It pops up our revenues here. And then we're keeping up with our expenses a lot better. A lot of those expenses are set by the MMSD. So we have to make sure, again, that our rates to our sewer customers are keeping up with those trends as well, and that we can cash flow here so that we can repay our debt and our operating costs. Regarding the cash balances or the unrestricted balances, we're sitting very similar in amounts as we are in the water utility. However, that doesn't cover quite as much of the year as what the water utility does. So this just tells us that our operating costs are a little bit higher at about 1.8 million compared to about 1 million in the water utility. So, so again, we're looking to, that is at least a billing cycle or so. So that's like 3, maybe 6 months, depending on your particular situation. But again, plenty on hand here, at least to make sure that your operating costs are covered. When we look at your investment in your capital, we have 34% of our sewer mains and lift stations and those types of equipment funded by debt, where 66% is has been paid for by revenues. So that is in a nutshell the utilities here. Are there any questions on those particular items or funds?
I do have a question. And the impact fees, how are those utilized?
Yeah.
Are they for future projects, or can they be utilized to pay down debt?
Yeah, so impact fees are kind of a fun tool. So they're collected at the time of development for future use. And so the village is in a little bit of a different situation where money was spent on projects that were planned to be paid for with these impact fees. So really what's happening is those impact fees are being collected for projects generally that have already occurred, if the village so chooses. And so they could be saved there's some cash on hand that has been collected, and it can be used for future projects, but without that, we're actually generally applying them to past projects that were approved at the time the impact fees were created. So right now, they're being used essentially to pay on the debt.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right, well, if anything comes up, feel free to reach out to me. Matt knows how to get a hold of me, and
Thanks, Amanda. We will move on then to item 6B, a presentation from Computer Magic regarding the implementation of multi-factor authentication. So what do we have on?
Brandon and Thomas with me as well from Computer Magic. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm sure everybody has heard about IT security threats in the news and the impact that they can have on the business. And that threat, I think, is often almost underrated with what the news talks about. As such, Computer Magic is adding solutions to better protect the village and their information. The first thing and what we want to talk about tonight is multi-factor authentication. And what multi-factor authentication does is combine something that you know. In most cases, this is a password with something that you have. And with the product that we're rolling out, that's either a smartphone and or a hardware token. A lot of banks and stuff use the hardware tokens. It's a key that has basically a random number generator that lets you put that key into your web browser or your program to authenticate with. And what that does is basically, if somebody gets your password, it makes it so that they would need that token as well in order to be able to log into your account. So just having your password alone is not enough to get into your account. Tom is going to go over the time frame we have. We want to get this implemented for the village quickly. So Tom is going to go over the time frame of what we're going to be doing with that, and then we'll open the floor up for any questions.
So in terms of a time frame, we're looking at really deploying the multi-factor authentication within the next 10 days here, which may seem very aggressive, but I think the timing is really crucial, given the threats that we've seen and kind of the feedback that we're getting from some of the peers and what we've seen out there. The first step really will be to assess on a department level who will be needing a hardware key, a hardware token, and I've had just a brief discussion with Matt this morning in regards to that. So an email went out to Matt, and I think I'm not sure if that has been distributed yet, but the department heads will need to decide. They'll need to inquiry their employees and ask who will be needing a hardware key versus who will be using the smartphone app for the multi-factor authentication. So once we've established that list, we'll be ordering those hardware keys, and then we'll be in contact to get everybody signed up for this new multi-factor authentication solution that we'll be deploying. And so, yeah, we're looking at a very aggressive timeline, but again, I think it's critical. It has to be in place, and so.
Yeah, in the past we've made this optional, and we're moving to this is a recommended, and we need to have this done in type of situation with the threats that are out there. So that being said, does anybody have any questions? Anything that we need answered?
Are you thinking it would include us as board members for accessing our email, or are you thinking more staff?
It will include board members for email as well. Yep. Yeah, anybody that has a village email will need to have the multi-factor authentication. And I would recommend, if you don't have it turned on your personal accounts, if it's an option, turn it on. It's one of the easiest things you can do, honestly, to keep things secure.
Any questions from board members or staff?
Tom or Brandon, if you could maybe just briefly touch base on, there were a few other layers of protection that you guys are planning to implement as well. maybe just from a high level to go through that, that's going to be part of our overall system going forward.
Sure. Brandon, you want to touch on that, or?
Why don't you start?
Absolutely. Just a second here. I'll pull it up. So there's 4 solutions actually total that we're looking at. We'd like to implement. Unfortunately, I'd like to say it's optional, but they're really not. We've reached a point in time where having these solutions in place is critical, especially for municipalities and really any business or organization that holds sensitive data. So we covered the multi-factor authentication, which blocks the majority of threats that come in, and really it secures your Microsoft account and various other accounts. The next solution that we're looking at implementing is, excuse me, is a cloud backup service for your Microsoft 365 account. So that'll secure your emails, that'll secure your OneDrive and your SharePoint files as well. I think unfortunately there's a common misconception that Microsoft backs up this data, that it's secure. Unfortunately, that's not entirely true. And as far as we know, and I believe we're correct, Dave, if you correct me if I'm wrong, that data is not secured and it's not protected by Microsoft. So if there's ever failure or a need to restore, a third-party application or solution would be needed. So this is precisely why we are looking at deploying that as well in our security stack.
How much, and I don't need to belabor this, but it is secured, but in terms of backup, you are correct, right? Like there are certain things, it's a shared responsibility matrix, right? So it depends on, and we could get into the details, right? But I'm just curious what you're looking to implement.
If you don't mind, I'd rather not share the name of the solution, and I can
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Just for security reasons and whatnot, we like to protect the solutions we use to minimize any risks that, because this is public information. You do it.
Totally understand.
Wonderful. The next one that we're looking at is what's referred to as an MDR / SOC solution. So MDR is a managed detection and response. So it's an additional layer to your antivirus. Think of it as, think of your antivirus as a parachute, the primary cord that you pull on your parachute. The MDR solution is the secondary cord that you have in case of failure. So the way we look at security is in a layered approach. If your primary defenses fail, or if your primary layers fail, you have additional layers that really secure you. So we've partnered with a company that's out of Maryland that specializes precisely in doing that. They have analysts on staff and, that operate 24/7. They engage in active threat hunting. So if they notice any suspicious behavior, anything that's out of line of what you would expect to see on your network, they'll take action and they'll assess and mitigate the threats. So again, we believe that this is critical to secure the village, and this is one of the products that we're looking at implementing as well.
And actually, that product has already been implemented, but
it has been. It's been secured in the village for quite a few months now, and it's doing great work. The last solution that we're looking at implementing is spam filtering and email encryption. So we've been using the standard spam filtering that Microsoft 365 offers. Unfortunately, we strongly believe that it's just not sufficient. Phishing attempts will get through. Malicious emails get through from time to time. And mitigating that as much as possible, I think, is a necessary approach. And therefore, we're looking at implementing this as well. So when you combine all these things together, we truly believe this would be the best mode or the best approach to secure the village from any cybersecurity threats.
Did that cover everything that we talked about, Matt?
Yep, that's good. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Real quick, are other municipalities that you guys serve implementing these solutions that you proposed? Or maybe you already have? Okay,
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
okay. Thank you.
I do have a question. Is this something that is in addition to our current contract, or is this just to let us know that this is what you're gonna be doing, so that we're aware that when we can't get into our emails, that there's something new, or?
Yes and yes. Is the proper response. Yes, I've shared the details of what the numbers would look like with Matt. So I'm not sure if he would like to share that with you individually. We figured it's not something that we would like to openly discuss here at this time, and we would ask that if you have additional questions in that regard, that we could maybe have it in full session or in another meeting where we could address those.
So then I guess the other question that I have is this something that's new, or why haven't we been doing this previously?
It is new to some degree, yes. The multi-factor authentication we approached, I want to say sometime last year, and we're trying to push relatively hard to get it deployed and implemented, but I will take full responsibility for it not being deployed. I will say, threats are evolving almost on a daily basis, and it's, I think, now more crucial than ever to get this implemented. So there's really no more excuses, and I think there's no reason to wait to get this deployed.
So this is on our agenda just as a presentation, so does the board have to take action, or is this going to be coming on our next agenda if there's like a difference in contract or something, Matt?
Well, there's a increase in cost, and I guess I wasn't aware that that's, unless I talk to the board individually about, it's all public record. I'm not aware of the cost involved. I guess I don't understand. Maybe Computer Magic can share why that couldn't be.
So Melissa, I was the one that asked for this agenda item just because I had a meeting with Tom and Brandon and the team, and just me working in the field, in the industry, right? Multi-factor auth is kind of a big deal, and can really remediate probably 80 to 90% of issues. So that's why I asked for this agenda item today.
Sure. But Melissa, to answer your question though about, we certainly could bring it to the board for action, but when it's there are our IT consultants, if they're recommending something and it's within earshot of budget and it's not going to blow apart our budget, and it's something that's being recommended for security purposes, unless I hear board members say otherwise, that's something I would just move forward with. I don't think we want to delay.
Oh, that makes sense. I just wanted to,
yeah,
because they were indicating that they wanted to move forward with this in the next 10 days, and this is just a presentation, so that's, but they're kind of asking if we wanted to move forward with it, so I was a little confused.
Sure, yeah, they're working with me on that, and it's not something that's gonna, it's an increase, but it's not a substantial increase.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that level of clarity, because I had the same question. Was there anything that you needed from us? But it sounds like it's more or less enriching us that you're adding this level of
right
security.
Right. Well, and for the heads up that all of a sudden, we don't want just all of a sudden you're like locked out of your email because you didn't know we changed something.
Sure.
So it's for education and all of that.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We definitely want to be more secure. We don't want to make the papers the ransomware thing. Moving on then to unfinished business Discuss and consider a school resource officer contract extension from 2021 through 2024. I assume Chief has something to say about this.
Otherwise, I can take the lead.
Or,
on
okay, I was going to go to you next, Rick.
So the chief can feel free to add anything, but, so this is essentially the same agreement that was already approved by the village. I think it was back in the spring, where, so this would just be the same contract, but for a 3-year term. The other one was just a 3-month term. However, one of the issues that has come up, and it's not an issue with the contract necessarily, it's an issue with interpretation of one of the terms of the agreement. So one of the terms is that the village has to provide a certificate of insurance that's acceptable to the school district, and that was not an issue in the past. However, now they're asking for $1 million cybersecurity policy to be listing them as an additional insured. I've talked to the attorney for the school district. That's a requirement that their insurance company is pushing forward. So Matt Bren got an estimate from the insurance company, and it would be about an extra $3,200, I think, per year, an additional insurance cost to the village. Spoke with the school district. They are going to talk to their insurance company about potential other options or reducing the level of insurance. We got some rough estimates. Wouldn't be a significant decrease at around $2,200 for like a $250,000 policy. But we're working with the school district to see if we can come to some sort of mutually agreeable solution if the village doesn't want to go forward with the $1 million policy. So,
And the city of Monona is having a similar discussion. Do you know, Rick, on when their council meeting was that also tonight, or?
I haven't heard anything from the city's attorney, but he expressed the same concerns of this is sort of an excess insurance amount, given it's a school resource officer that's not really going to have access to the records that they're worried about. So the insurance company's point was that the school resource officer will have access to records, to student records, and that could create some liability issues, either ransomware or disclosure of student records. So whether or not those are worthy of a $1 million policy, I guess that's maybe a board decision. So I guess there are a couple or a few options for you tonight. If the village feels like the $3,000 amount is, I guess, worth it, or having the extra insurance policy for the village in general is worth it, you could approve this agreement. If it's just not acceptable at all, the village could just not approve it tonight, and we could work with the city and the school district to come to some sort of solution on this. Or a third option would be conditionally approve it on staff finding a mutually agreeable insurance solution moving forward on this.
I did speak with the school resource officer. I did speak with the school resource officer about it and asked her if she needed the access to the program, and she said it wasn't necessary to do her job. So it's not like we could just say, hey, we don't need access to school records like that and skip it for us. And as far as the rest of the contract goes, it's pretty much the same language as our last contract that we signed. Nothing has changed for us dramatically.
So this is in place on the 27th of this month.
Correct. So the other consideration here is if this is not approved, and let's say we get into September with the school year starting, the school district would not be on the hook for any sort of reimbursement payments to the village. So obviously that helps to fund the position. So since the last agreement is no longer in effect, it's not like it just carries over. So there would be a funding decrease on that end.
Well, I'm more concerned about trying to, if the resource officer has to jump in after the kids have already acclimated and, you're putting the officer then in, behind, just engaging and doing all the things that they do at the school with the students. That's my real concern.
Hey Rick, could the school not just include that $3,000 and reimbursement back to us?
That is a discussion that the attorney for the school district was going to have with their administrator. The potential challenge there is if the village gets it, the city's going to want it too. So don't know if the school district is going to want to provide that extra funding. But I've had initial discussions with the attorney, and seems like they want to try to, like, if this is something that is going to be a challenge to the village, that they want to work with the village to try to find something that can satisfy everybody.
I mean, ultimately, this is their insurance company, not the school.
Correct.
So we got to kind of parse that out.
Right.
And they want to stay in good graces with the insurance company too. So I get it. They're kind of they're in a tight spot just like us.
50-50 has a nice ring to it. Pick up half of the city and half of the village.
So that was my question as far as, well, kind of along those lines, is why doesn't the school's insurance cover this liability?
We can certainly look into that to see. Like I said, my conversations haven't been with the insurance company, so that may be a call that we all need to get on. We just found out about this late last week, so we've been trying to pull everything together, but we can try to get a better understanding of what the insurance company's rationale is, and to see why why the school district's policy wouldn't cover this, or why the village needs to provide that.
Do we, as a police department, have a policy of insurance to cover any of our information getting out?
They don't have access to our information.
No, I don't mean the school having information. I guess it's all public record pretty much. If any criminal case information got out or something like that, I guess we don't necessarily need insurance for that purpose.
We have pretty broad coverage that, almost, we're pretty well protected under the league's insurance. It's standard across, whatever we have is standard across almost all cities and villages. So if it's a best practice, we have it.
I'll make a motion to conditionally approve the school resource officer contract extension from 2021 to 2024, barring mutually agreed upon outcome regarding the insurance agreement.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, thanks, David. Thanks, Sarah. Any further discussion?
If I got one question, with the new contract, based on what happened with COVID, are there any guarantees that pay if someone decides to close the school down for a long period of time, or any sort of public emergency health situation, whatever you call it?
So this agreement is a continuation of the last one, where even though it was virtual, the village was still getting reimbursed. So assuming that the school district, like, if they were to go virtual again, this contract follows the instructional year, whether it's in person or virtual.
Page 3?
Yep.
You highlighted it.
So we could almost use the fact that they paid us to the last period of school being in session in person as a precedent then, that if that were to happen again, that we would continue to get paid for that individual, the school resource officer, just one individual.
Correct. Well, basically the agreement allows for, or anticipates that there could be virtual classes in the future. So as long as there's some instruction going on, then the village will be reimbursed for the school resource officer position.
It's on page 3 of the agreement. All right, any other further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right. Moving then on to discuss and consider a hybrid meeting policy, which is in our packet. Some changes have been made and highlighted. Rick, you want to start us off?
Yes, so this is a revised policy based on the comments that were received at the last meeting. I'm not going to claim ownership of it. Larry gets all the credit there. But it incorporated the comments that the board members had. So we believe it accurately reflects the discussion that was had and providing the needed flexibility for having hybrid meetings in the future.
All right. Any questions for Rick on this?
Thanks for making the changes. I'll second.
All right, thank you, Troy. Thank you, Sarah. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. All right, then we move right down to reports from village boards, commissions, and committees. Starting off with Public Works, I'll take a stab at this, and JJ, you can jump in, please. So we met on August 3rd. We covered an update on the glacial drumlin path over on Clark Street. There is a bit of a delay there if anybody's gone down there. We still have some work for Alliant to do, and I ran through there today, and there's still a bunch of poles up. So I'm assuming that hasn't changed since August 3rd when we met as a committee. So hasn't put the project in jeopardy yet, right?
Correct.
But it's getting close.
Well, we're not close yet technically, just because the biggest concern is asphalt paving, so we're still okay there, but I'm still waiting for an update from Alliant as to their timeline.
All right, then next we covered the Bus Road and Cottage Grove Road project. Again, work is, at that point, was slightly ahead, and it stayed ahead, and I think right now we're looking at just signage.
That's correct.
Which is a big deal and has to be done properly, so. Then we covered, just starting to queue up for the financial season for the village. We talked a little bit about the financial plan. JJ laid out 3 projects: Main Street Bike Path, West Oak Street improvements, and East Taylor and Ridge Road improvements. And kind of walk through just the adjustments there, some scope change and just some cost change to the original estimates on that. That you'll all see eventually as we work way through the budget season. That was approved by the committee. Discussed a stop sign modification for 3 areas. JJ gave a memo. We've had some citizens' concerns. There's just some best practices from an engineering perspective. And so the committee approved those. And actually, this is a discuss and consider item here. And that would be to take a look at 3 particular egregious examples, recommended corrective measures: a 3-way stop at the intersection of Killian and Dungle, a 2-way stop at Manley and Court Crossing, and a 2-way stop at Landmark and Michelle. Village engineer recommended following the manual of uniform traffic control devices. This has also been in consultation with our police. And so the committee recommended that we follow up on all 3 of those intersections. And I think those are the big items. Anything else I missed before I jump back to stop signs?
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay. So on the stop sign memo, it's included those intersections I rattled off. Any questions for JJ or Josh is on, or Chief?
I have a question. I didn't get a chance to get out and go actually see these intersections. But if they're two-way signs right now, and we were to take those out, then they would be uncontrolled intersections, is that right?
No.
Okay.
They're through streets, so they're all streets where one of the roads ends and hits a through street. So generally at an intersection like that, the through street, per state statutes, has the right of way. So they no matter what, are supposed to have the right of way, and traffic on the street that ends is supposed to yield to them. So it just makes sense for there not to be a stop sign on the through traffic road. And the manual on uniform traffic control devices does not recommend stop signs at those types of intersections. And they find that people disregard the stop signs, which makes them even more unsafe. So that's why we started the process of identifying some of these unnecessary stop signs for removal.
And this all started because a couple citizens raised concern. And again, just as Chief said, there's people ignore the one and then go through, or there's the one, it's a three-way intersection, there's two stop signs, which is even worse in my mind, for confusion-wise. So that's why we took a look at these and consulted engineering as well as JJ and Chief. And these are the three that popped up as far as, for whatever reason, along the way, we've decided to put a stop sign in, and it doesn't follow, engineering practices, it doesn't follow traffic practices, it doesn't necessarily slow traffic down if that's what your intent is, because it's not what that is for. So that's why we're raising this to the board.
I'm just wondering what you're gonna do with those extra stop signs then.
There's always somewhere to use them. We always need spares.
Yep.
My recommendation was to put them on Taylor Street.
Hey.
So with that level of clarification, I'll motion to approve the stop sign modifications as presented in the memo.
Second.
All right, thank you, Paul, thank you, David. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, then, no questions for public works. We'll move on to Community Development Authority. Dave, do you want to take this?
Yeah, it was a pretty quick meeting, last CDA, we, touched base with, the consultants again, to walk us through some of the options, for signage. Did put forth a motion to, change some of the signage, and it's kind of escaping me at the moment. A lot of it would be the signs like at, 19 and Gaston, full Main Street signs. There were some other signs like municipal services, the Commerce Park monument sign, or really more of a monument than a sign. Some of those we thought we'd either leave till next fiscal year or just not touch at all, especially that Commerce Park monument. We didn't even get quotes. It's so big and hard to understand. It's hard to, you have to know what you're looking at to understand what see the trees through it. So there's that. I think the other one that we talked about was the shared town and village welcome signs. They don't really adhere to any standard. It's got a bunch of trees on it, so we probably leave those two with. Figured we make the easiest ones, which were the road signs and Main Street signs, and then the lettering on some of the trucks, the parking lot vehicles. So, like I said, pretty good meeting. That's what we approved, and then we closed the meeting.
All right. Thanks, David. I think the other one were the park signs too. We're going to work on slowly moving those over.
Yeah, that was for next year. It was the first time.
Any questions on that? Or Aaron, anything to add? You did all the Where's Waldo, finding all these signs.
Yeah, so I guess just to back up, it was for the purpose of updating the logo. These
Yeah.
were signs that had the old logo.
All right. Moving then down to Ad Hoc Sustainability Committee, that would be Heidi.
Sure, thanks, John. We met on the 10th, and we started talking about 2022 budget recommendations and some programs that we like to see continue or expand, like the Rain Barrel program, for example, or, similar programs like that. We also talked about potential for electric vehicle charging stations, to look into that, benchmarking and tracking our energy use, so we can track how we're progressing and reducing our electricity use. Talked about including endorsements or support for other projects in the budget that have a sustainability aspect, like the Oak Street to include a bike path, for example. Also continue to talk to Alliant about solar options at a larger scale. So we've talked about broad things, not necessarily big ticket items necessarily, but ways we can keep chipping away. We're going to keep talking about budget things next month also. And then the Bike the Grove event in September on the 17th. We touched on that briefly, and there'll be more information about that as we connect with more of our local businesses for that. Our next meeting is going to be September 21st at 6. Any questions?
All right, thanks, Heidi. Then we'll move on to Library Planning Committee. So Melissa?
Thanks, John. We met last Wednesday, the 11th. We reviewed the library board memo. There's a bunch of attachments in the board agenda that we reviewed. The library board memo was about establishing a library board and how it's important to continue the process of understanding the financial impact on the community and the fundraising opportunities in building a library here. The memo notes that the library board does not guarantee the building of a library, but it does allow for accurate, adequate researching and planning that needs to happen. We reviewed grant and submission details. The Friends of the Cottage Grove Library will be submitting an application for a grant to the EVU Foundation for diversified programming in our community. And there's also another grant opportunity with, I think it's the Steve Stricker Foundation through American Family, that they are going to be applying for a grant to bring other programming here. We reviewed that libraries are economic engines. There's a memo in there. The memo notes that libraries and the services they provide increase the value to municipalities they serve. Specifically, it was found that for every dollar of taxpayer support, the return to the community is $4.06. This comes back to taxpayers in the form of the value of public library services and the direct economic contribution of public libraries to the state economy. This is based on providing a service that keeps residents in our community and allows them to look at opportunities to spend their money in our community. And it's based on providing a service that brings in people from outside our community and allows them to look at and go to businesses here that they wouldn't have known about or gone to, but for coming to our community to go to our library. Also, libraries have shown that they help businesses and business owners by providing an information resource for investment decisions, as well as providing free resources for owners to start, grow, and improve their businesses. This helps the local economy and our community by providing a new business, a new place for employment, and new and increased tax base. It also provides residents with a resource for improving job skills and the programming and free resources libraries can provide. The last thing that we reviewed was the memo to the village board on our prioritization process. And if you review that memo that was in the report, it goes through how the library fits in with the priorities. A lot of our priorities that we had listed, and we went through, including the fiscal responsibility and financial planning, economic growth, diversity, equity, inclusion, sustainability, emergency management planning, food insecurity, communication and engagement, housing, and parks and recreation. and that it fits in with the Cottage grow, with the village's mission and vision. So we reviewed all that at our meeting. If you had questions about the grants, Cindy Kell-Nelson, the chair, is on our meeting tonight as well. Otherwise, our next meeting is tentatively September 15th.
Cindy, do you know when you'll hear the results of any of those grants that you're applying for?
They're both due at the end of the month, and I think November is when you hear back from the FU Foundation. And I'm assuming the ANFAM sticker one would be like late fall too, or early winter.
Any other questions for Melissa or Cindy?
I just have one other quick question. Are you thinking the funding would go to the friends of the library, and then that would help kind of reinforce those funds versus somehow helping, pay for some of the budget items in our 2022 budget?
Sure, so this is, they have to be submitted by a 501c3. So the friends are submitting them, and I think the goal is really to bring library programming back to different populations in the Cottage Grove. So the first grant, the FU Foundation grants, is a $5,000 grant to bring programming to families and to seniors. The other monies would probably go towards teen groups or young adults. At least that's what's been talked about.
Okay. All right. With that, then we'll move on. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to Flynn Hall Committee. Troy.
We had last Wednesday review where we're at with current budget and then determined that we need in budget for 2022. We're on course to be in budget this year, and it was voted on and passed to keep the budget the same in 2022 as it was in 2021. It was about a 4.3-minute meeting.
All right. Any questions for Troy? All right. Then we'll move on to Plan Commission. So I'll take a stab and then let either Melissa or others jump in. So Plan Commission met on August 11th as well, and covered a couple of items. One of which was, first one was tabled, and that was application for a site plan approval from Alliant Energy and Wisconsin Power and Light to construct an electrical substation at 240 Bonney Road. Based on a fairly lengthy presentation and discussion from the Plan Commission, it was tabled. We asked Alliant to come back with some additional information, really key, I think, for this. It's not a question of whether or not we need another substation in the village. It's a question of where and how it looks and where it is, and there are not a lot of other questions. How ATC will get the power to it. We are off of right now 2 substations. They explained it as this is the donut hole for us, and we kind of have to fill that in to have another one to support both our current and future needs to ensure reliable power. So more to come on that. A lot of good feedback. A lot of community members provided feedback. I think ultimately that'll help it become a good thing in the end. Then we had a public hearing on a request from Brett Mulder for a conditional use permit to extend the existing temporary use permit for 2 tiny homes that are on Progress Drive. They're stationed there. They're looking for homes for these homes, but right now they haven't had that. The community that was they were designated for hasn't really happened. It got turned up inside out with COVID, as Brian explained. The commission approved that extension for 12 months, and that is the item that we have up for consideration for the board this evening, and that was pretty much it for the meeting. It did last more than 4 minutes. to that point. Any questions on that? Any questions around the conditional use permit?
I'll make a motion to approve the request for approval of conditional use permit to extend existing temporary permit to store the two unoccupied tiny homes on lot 2 of CSM 11991 on Progress Drive in the Business Park.
I'll second.
All right. Thanks, Heidi. And thanks, Paul. Any further discussion?
Is that per staff's,
Yes, per staff's memo and conditions.
I would say the recommendations in the village action report, because the staff report said 6 months and the plan commission extended it to 12, which
This due winter.
Okay. But, you know, that's
Just needed Lisa to nod to say that we got it. And Paul, you're good with that?
Yep.
Okay.
So second.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. With that, then, any further discussion?
I was unclear, is that, you made that motion for 6 or 12 months?
The commission approved 12. Just because 6 months would have landed in the middle of winter, and we didn't think that they would probably move then and they'd be back again to get it out into the spring. That's what the discussion at the commission was.
the commission for 12.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thanks.
All right. Again, any other further discussion? All right, having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, next then we have reports from village officers, starting at Stanford. Rick, anything to add there?
Just one quick note. It might only be interesting to Lisa, but the census data was released last week, so that somewhat implicates the village just because there will be ward redrawings and things like that. But with the redistricting battle that is almost assuredly coming, it could affect drawing of village ward lines. So that's something that we'll monitor, and I'm sure I'll be in touch with Lisa with at some point.
I know the lawsuit already started no, even before the data came out.
There was a lawsuit filed right away.
Preemptively, I don't know. Anything else, Rick?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to communication miscellaneous business. This is consider of approval of vouchers. Anybody have questions, comments about the vouchers as presented?
I'll move to approve the vouchers.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Paul. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Correspondence. I did get a letter today in the mail that's actually addressed to Lisa from the Department of Revenue, and basically it outlines that the county equalized report has been changed, the assessed sales ratios analysis. We'll go down the list here, all that type of data that's been presented from the Department of Revenue. So I brought it just in case Lisa doesn't have it. I'll leave it here. I'm assuming you do, since it was addressed to you but sent to me. To make sure Matt has as well. Any other correspondence from anyone else? Moving then on to upcoming community events.
I do have a couple things. Thursday, Kirsty has a virtual lunch and learn that they run in conjunction with the MPO. And this lunch and learn is on environmental corridors. So the primary audience are local county staff, local officials, consultants, and interested community members. So you can register for that on Kirsty's website. They also record it so you could view it on your own time as well.
Thanks, Heidi. Anyone else?
There is a free family fun day at Fish Camp County Park with the Friends of Lake Kaganza Society on Saturday, August 21st from 10 to 3. So it's not right in our vicinity, but it's nearby, just down Highway N.
Great. Anyone else? I just want to shout out to both the Monona and Cottage Grove community last Saturday for their generosity when it came to stuff the bus, both financially as well as supplies. So those went off this week, or going off this week to the various schools. So just a shout out to everybody for being very generous when it comes to the kids. So with that, I'll move. Then do we have future agenda items? Matt, anything we gotta call it right now?
Let me look at my old school calendar here.
That's all right. If it works, it works.
As of now, unless something real urgent comes up, I think we can bypass the alternate date of September 2nd for a board meeting, which will please my wife, as that's our anniversary, and we're now planning to induce her into labor on the 28th of August, which is maybe TMI for this call, but anyway, so I'd prefer not to have a meeting that night. But for the 20th, we do have, 20th of September would be the next meeting then, and we should have financial management plan approval for that night. The finance committee will be meeting on the 14th of September to discuss the draft and make a recommendation to the board, and the board will discuss it on the 20th. And that's about it. There may be a chance this is mainly just procedural, but per our ordinances, I need to recommend someone to carry out the statutory duties of treasurer, and it's possible by that time we'll have someone in the finance director role, and that's of course who I would recommend carry out those duties, so there may be an agenda item that way too.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Matt. Anyone else? Just ask on the board level. Okay. Then we'll move right on to item 11. I will move that we go into closed session for negotiations regarding land sale and development incentives in TID number 5. The Village of Cottage Grove Board will enter a closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, and the conducting of specific public business wherever competitive bargaining reasons are required. A closed session. Is there a second? Thank you, Troy. With that, we'll do a roll call vote. So Lisa, please.
Eklund,
Aye.
Allen. Aye. Williams,
Aye.
Murphy, Peterson,
Aye.
Vanderbilt,
Aye.
and Valencia. Aye.
All right, the village board is now in closed session. We'll come back into the Zoom once we are. So those board members, please go on the closed session Zoom.
Who's gonna get there first? Usually Melissa.
You and your.
Yep.
You can turn